welcome to our second PlaySpace Zoom. So we had a first Zoom. It was almost like it was a month ago, and it was with comic artists from DC and Marvel, and today it's about storytelling and writing, and obviously there's a big link between the two. So the first thing I just wanted to introduce the session by saying that basically when we've done this project, the Hackney Young Voices project, it was all really about giving these young people we've got here, about 30 people in total, so there's quite a few more, a chance to actually express themselves in the way that they often don't get a chance to, and really sort of come up with something of themselves. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was ask them what it is that they care about, what is it that they like to do. And I didn't know if there was a lot of creativity happening at home, or and turns out that yes, of course there is an awful lot. And most of so the children that you've got here already on the call do a lot of comics, for example, or writing, or drawing, or videos, or there's so much going on. One of the boys as well is Bowie, who really wants to be a writer as well. So it felt like writing and coming up with stories is actually such an essential thing to do. And I think sometimes the way you do writing at school, it's less about storytelling than it can be about adverbs and other things. We've got the wonderful Anna Kemp here today. Anna writes picture books and children's fiction, and she often says that she was a slow reader at school, but that didn't stop her from becoming an author herself. Anna used to teach French literature at university, and she once wrote a book about a writer called Georges Perec, who I love myself. He wrote a whole novel without using the letter E. Can you imagine without an E what it would be like to have a whole book without the letter E? And her books have been adapted for television, for Bookaboo, for CBBS, and also for puppetry. So some of you will be familiar with the Little Angels Theatre, which is quite local, for orchestra with the LSO, and even for dance and for theatre. And she's been recognised through many prizes and awards, and she's the proud writer in residence for Magical Children's pen pal Banjo Robinson, that some of you might know. So this is a short introduction to Anna. And if there's anything else you want to add, feel free, Anna.
No, that was very generous. Thank you very much.
Carmen, go on. You've got something.
May I just say, I'm a really big fan of her books, your books.
Oh, thank you.
Basically, I got Dogs Don't Do Ballet, I've got The Last Princess, and I've also got Rhinos Don't Eat Pancakes, and
wow,
Giraffes Don't Dance.
Oh, wow, that's lovely to hear. Thanks so much.
Also, I know The Last Princess by heart.
Do you? I don't think I know it by heart. I'm very impressed that you know it by heart.
I read it so many times. I've got it downstairs, actually.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing that. I'm really thrilled.
And you'll see that we've got you've got a new book coming in September.
That's right.
Into Goblin Wood as well, which is very exciting. So that's why I wanted to have it in here.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's the new one.
I can't wait.
Out of my depth. It's sort of gone from picture books to fantasy trilogy, and it's a big leap.
Well, you're going to be able to tell us more about it. And I would also like to introduce Emily Devane here. And Emily is she's a writer, editor, and teacher. And before she started her writing career, she used to teach history in schools. She began writing short stories when her children were small. And the first time she submitted a story to a flash fiction competition, she won the first prize. That's how good it was. Writing is Emily's full-time occupation. When she's not churning out award-winning story after story, she's also the founding editor of Flashback Fiction and more, and applying her previous experience as a teacher to teach others how to do creative writing. And she even finds the time to work in a bookshop one day a week because she loves being inspired by books around her. And she was there today, so that's she's bringing that to the party. And we wanted to sort of, Emily, I think that we're talking about something quite specific in writing, which is flash fiction. And have any of you heard of flash fiction, children? You can just nod or, yeah. Yes, no, just do yes or no. Carmen has. Carmen is like, she's the lady in the know. You've got a question, that people. Do you want to say something?
Anna Kemp. Question mark. Did you make Giraffes Don't Dance?
No, actually, that's not mine. That one isn't mine. That's somebody else. I did Dogs Don't Do Ballet, this one.
I've read that one as well.
Similar concept, different animal.
Brilliant.
I remember Giraffes Don't Dance when I was smaller, being one of the few books that I knew very well.
I love Dogs Don't Do Ballet.
Yeah, you can talk about it.
I would love to share with you a few things that I've mentioned earlier, that the children have done an amazing project with us. Like, we've done several weeks of workshops, and what was brilliant is that they brought themselves some of the work that they've been doing, and that's anything from stories to beautiful drawings being digital or such. I mean, this is just a tiny sort of portion of it. But I just wanted to share some of the work. So this is from Woody as well, who does this beautiful comics.
Goodness, that's fabulous.
And Evan, you still need to send me some of your comics so I can show them off as well, because you're.
I have the biggest ant I have ever seen on my thumb.
I found it on his back. Sorry, random question.
That is a fantastic comic. Who did the comic?
This is Woody. And the other thing I wanted to show you is the beautiful work that the children have been doing. And so they all wanted to like create a version of themselves and sort of bring this bubble to it. And sort of it's all about, you know, being who you are. So it was really fantastic to see this developing.
I love the mix of words and image and the colours. It's beautiful.
Love that.
It's wonderful.
And I'll show you then
with the sort of tentacles, the sort of different coloured tights or tentacles flowing off them.
Yeah.
This is from Tristan, who's here on the call. This is the one by the secondary school, which is Stoke Newington School, and Carmen is our representative from this team today.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Carmen, did you do those the girls with the unicorn horn, and is that your drawing?
And the pirate hat.
Pirate.
Yeah.
With a strong message: always be yourself, unless you can be a pirate or a unicorn.
Yeah.
It's interesting because that could be a book in itself, couldn't it?
Yes, they could.
You might need to get writing on that one. You know all the tricks already, Carmen. So I think,
Speaking of comics, I'm writing a comic right now as we speak.
always busy. Is it about unicorns and pirates?
No, it's my own version of Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, wow.
So, Carmen, all of this you need to share with me, okay? Not just in the calls. I need to see all this stuff. Promise?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to be bugging you. I'll show you the third and the final sort of board. Emily's prepared a little bit of introduction to flash fiction, because it's Carmen might know about it, but many people I didn't know about it.
So, flash fiction. I've just got a few little pointers to tell you about what flash fiction is. So, first of all, flash fiction tends to be the name given to stories that are under 1,000 words. So, in terms of the stories that you write, I expect quite a few of these fall into that category of flash fiction. Often flash fiction is less than 500 words, so it's really, really tiny stories, and some are really, really short, 100, 150 words. It's also known as short fiction, microfiction, and sudden fiction, which is quite a funny title, because flash fiction makes you think it's kind of just appears out of nowhere. So people have been telling and writing very short stories for centuries. It's not a new thing, although flash fiction, I think, is a fairly recent term for it. So what's great about flash fiction and why do I like it? Well, first of all, it can be written quite quickly. So you can write it in one sitting, which is really satisfying. And it can also be read in a few minutes. So it's perfect for sharing it out loud or reading it online, or when you're on a bus or waiting for something. You can read a whole story in a very short amount of time. It's a great form for experimenting with things like style and structure. So there's a type of flash fiction called the hermit crab, which I think you guys would really like. And the hermit crab is where you write a story, but like a hermit crab, you borrow a different form in which to tell your story, like the hermit crab borrows another shell. And so you could write your story as a recipe or as a shopping list, or I've seen stories written as computer programs. So have a think about all the kind of different ways in which you could write a story or tell a story. I've even seen a story that was written like the packaging of a bar of soap, and that was amazing. So, you know, it was actually turned into something that looked like a bar of soap. So it's great for experimenting, partly because I think for something as long as a novel, I think sometimes the reader isn't so keen to play along with something experimental, whereas in a really short story, I think the reader will. So it often focuses on just one brief moment or scene. So it might be an epiphany, a moment in a character's life when they suddenly get a new sense of meaning, or suddenly realize something about themselves or those around them. Now, because you guys are probably thinking, well, how can I make use of flash fiction? What can I do with it? The really great thing about it is there's lots of opportunities for you to develop your writing craft, because you can try writing lots of different stories, and because they're short, you can write quite a few of them and you can get them published. So look out for competitions for young writers. The 500 words competition, which used to be run by the BBC, that's actually coming back next year. So do look out for that, because that's for your age group. And there's also a really great website called the youngwriters.org. I've put a link to it here. So if I give this to Catherine, she can send it on to you. And I know at the moment they've got a competition to write mystery stories. So that sounds quite exciting. And finally, I've written an article with some tips about how to write really good flash fiction, and I've put a link to that there as well. So I'm not going to go through that now, but it's something that you could go through at a later point. My final thing I'm going to leave you on before you have any questions is, I like to think of a story as being a bit like an iceberg. So you see the bit at the top, but there's loads going on under the surface that you don't necessarily mention, but you know is there. So you're thinking that the flash fiction, the iceberg is the tip of the iceberg is the bit that you can see. And I've got a little acronym for you here, which is something to think about if you're writing stories. So my first one is I for impact. So this is about having a really great opening, a title that really draws your reader in, thinking about the emotional impact you're going to have on your reader. So are you going to make them laugh? Are you going to scare them? Are you going to make them feel sad and emotional? What do you want them to think at the end of the story? So that's something to think about, the impact your story will have. Now, the second is C for craft. And this is all about those sentences and the stuff that you do at school and how you put it all together. But here I'd like you to think about how the story, the shape of the story. So the idea of a story is that something is different by the end. And that is really as simple as it gets. That's my definition of plot. Has something happened that is different by the end? Even if nothing's actually happened, it's just that a character has looked at other options and realized they like things exactly as they are. And that, again, is a plot. So craft is to do with your point of view, who your characters are, the setting, how you form your sentences, and all those things that make up your story and how you decide to tell your story. Will you tell it from the past, from the present, in the future, all those sorts of things. Finally, echo, and you'll see the acronym is pleasing here because it's ICE, which is like my iceberg. So echo. Now, I believe a really good story needs to end on a really good note. And the echo, I see that as being like, that's what the reader is left with when they finish your story. So it's like the final note of your story. How you leave your reader will then determine how they think about your story when they think back to it. So it's almost like the end of a song, and you get that final note or final chord. Does it fade away? Does it go out with a bang? Does it go out happy or sad, or with a bit of mystery and a question mark? So have a think about how you end your story. Will there be a twist, or will it be something that you've developed during the actual sort of narrative that you've told? Now, the next bit, I'm going to leave out the next bit, Catherine, if that's okay, because I know that, you know, it's probably quite long. But I know Catherine did share with you some stories that I've written. And one of them, which is called The Word Swallower, is a story about a child who eats paper. And they eat so much paper that in the end they turn into a book. And that story was published a few years ago now. And what I've done at the end of this presentation, I've shown you several versions of that story and shown you how the story developed and how I gradually edited it to change it into what it became, and how I changed the title from The Paper Eater into The Word Swallower. And I did various things to just make it a better story. So hopefully you can see the journey of that story, and that can help you when you're writing your own. So I think I can stop sharing that now, Catherine, and then if anybody has any questions, obviously I can answer any.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's so,
Okay.
I think we often talk about some of the elements of stories like characters and plot, but I think it's really nice when you talk about ice, the impact, and all of this stuff, like so a different aspect of sort of looking at stories. How about you? What did you want to say?
I just wanted to say two things. One of them was, you know, what is it called? Like crab something rather.
Hermit crab. Hermit crab. Yeah.
Well, how you said it could like be written on any sort of like thing. Well, I once read a book that the whole story was just letters. Like it was different characters' points of view. So I just wanted to say that. And then the second thing was what like made you make the story the word eater or
the word swallower?
Word
what inspired me to write that story? Well, okay, it is about a person who as a child eats paper, and what inspired me was there was a competition, and the competition was to write a story about food. And I thought, when I do a competition, particularly if it's a themed competition, I think, how can I think outside the box and do something different? Everybody's going to be writing about food. How about writing about things you're not supposed to eat? And then I remembered a girl I knew at school who used to eat paper. And I thought, oh, I wonder what would happen if you ate paper, and what would happen if you ate paper and you became the words on the paper. And I just took it to its logical conclusion, which was she becomes a book. And then the final line about her being an open book, you might have heard of that phrase, she's an open book, or he's an open book. It means you're easy to read. Well, once she's a book, her mum can't recognize her. And I think, yeah, it's a story about how the words that you read might change you, I guess. But the bit in that story about the girl who eats the ticket, that was me. That was me when I was a child. I was once in a queue for my lunch. I ate my lunch ticket because I was so hungry, and when I got to the front they wouldn't give me any lunch. So that inspired that particular line. Thank you for your question, Alba. That was great.
Brilliant. I'm loving that. The idea of eating paper sounds so strange, but it makes complete sense as well.
Probably, I think each have a question, each of the people. But my question is, do you have any tips for getting a reader like really engaged when they first read a book? Like say you're writing the first page of a book, and often you read, say, the first 3 pages and like, this book's not for me, or that's funny, or something that you get from the book. And do you just have any ways to manipulate that? Exactly, like make it so that the reader reads like the first 3 lines. Oh, I like this book. I'm gonna finish it cover to cover and buy it 5 times. Do you have any ways to get the reader engaged on the first?
Do you want to start, and then I'll give a few points?
It's a really good. It's such a good question. It's such a difficult one as well. And the first thing that comes to mind is, you know, how Hollywood writers have this this saying: "Get in late, get out early," which means you should arrive in a scene just as it starts to get interesting, and you get out as soon as the main action is over. So you wouldn't want to start a scene or a story with the character sort of, you know, waking up, brushing her teeth, having her breakfast, because, you know, you quickly get quite bored. So if the kind of the main question or event comes in earlier in your story, that's going to hook the reader and pull them in. So that's the first thing that comes to mind, is get in late, get out early.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's a really great point, Anna. Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I've often heard of it as throat clearing, which is when we start a story, we sort of do a lot of I'm just going to write a story, and we start and we have all this preamble, and then we think, oh gosh, I've run out of time, and we wrap it up a bit too quickly. So yeah, it's nice to just cut that first bit and go straight into the action. I would also say, because I write flash fiction, which has to be really short, so I'm used to getting rid of words and shedding them left, right and center, you don't always need to describe everything. So say you're in a station, you don't have to describe that there are trains there and, you know, all the rest of it. You can just say in the station, and the reader can immediately picture that. So you're kind of cutting through the kind of maybe lengthy, boring description. But a final thing I would just say is that one of my tips is, I think readers all respond in different ways. So some are really visual, some like listen to the words as they read them, and some are aware of like the senses, like the touch and the taste and the smell of things. And I think when you're writing, if you use details that make the reader feel something, so you can, you know, have like a bakery with the smell of bread, or the sound of a bird in the garden, or the particular feel of sand between your toes. I think those kind of sensory details can really bring a reader into a piece and make them feel as though they're part of it and they're immersed in it. So that's another little tip.
Okay. Do you have a question? Yeah, I have a question. You know how you do like flash fiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Has any of like if has like, what was your first like official book that sort of kickstarted your career, and what made it so different from all the others?
Right. Okay. Well, my stories, because they're really small, they tend to be in large books with other writers. I don't have all of my stories in one book, but I think Catherine mentioned this earlier, my first story that won a prize was a story I wrote when I lived in Wood Green, and I went to a local competition where you had to look at some artwork and write a story inspired by the artwork. And I saw this painting of a girl, and she had a big red bow on her head, and she looked really a bit scared. She had her mouth open, and I thought, oh, she looks like she's just had a shock. So I wrote a kind of quite spooky story based on that, and it was judged by Robert Shearman, who's a writer for Doctor Who. And so I thought, I'm going to make it super spooky, because he likes his spooky stuff. So yeah, that's why I think that was noticed, because I had noticed who the judge was. So you can be quite clever about this as well. If there's a competition, look at who the judge is, find out about them, and that might inspire you as well, and that might make you think about how you might do it, or have a look at previous winners' stories and see what you like about those stories, and think about how you might incorporate that in your own.
I mean,
so
it's very interesting.
That was the big thing for me.
Yeah. It's very interesting how you talked about like knowing who the judge is. Like it, because sometimes like you don't. I just think that sometimes it like was the judge like how, like, I just want to know, how did you get I don't know, it seems very fascinating.
You want to say, how do you know who the judge is? Because you don't always know who the judge is. I had a story recently, and it was in a shortlist, and it was judged by the writer Michael Morpurgo. I don't know if you've heard of him. Obviously, and so I knew Michael Morpurgo was reading my story, and that was really scary. And then sadly, he didn't choose my story to win the big prize, but I was so honored for this amazing writer to be reading my story.
does
So
good
that was enough of a treat for me.
He does good books.
He does indeed. He's great.
You can just say.
I thought it'd be interesting to hear Anna as well, because you're more in the book element as well. So the same sort of question: what was the book that sort of started things for you?
It was this one, Dogs Don't Do Ballet, which is the first one. But before that, I'd written loads of other. I think for every good idea I have, I've got 20 ideas which are garbage and they go in the bin. So especially with picture books, and I think that's one thing I would, as advice to aspiring writers, is you just got to write. You just got to keep writing, because a lot of it will just end up in the bin, but occasionally you'll hit on something that is just the seed of an idea that might just work. So I had kind of submitted other stories, and other things had been pitched to publishers and they hadn't come off, and that was the first one that caught publishers' attention.
How did you not get discouraged? Because I think it's quite. I get very discouraged very quickly about things like that.
No, I do too. I mean, it's always difficult, but I think I just keep throwing stuff at the wall, really. I think I've got used to the idea now that most, and same with when working on a longer book as well. Like the book that I'm writing at the minute, I think I have to write every scene 5 times in 5 different ways before I find the right way forward with it. It's quite hard going, but for some reason I just keep trusting that I will, or hoping that I will get there in the end.
Yeah, it does take a lot of perseverance. I agree, but also I think, having judged a few competitions myself, it's amazing, you know, you still remember stories that didn't quite make the shortlist or didn't quite win, and you still remember them as the judge. And I think sometimes we don't realize just how close things are, just how close things come. So even if it's a rejection, it might be that there was something in that story that really touched the judge, or, you know, that they really loved, and to keep going with it. And it doesn't mean that it's not very good. It's just wasn't chosen this time, because we all have different taste, I guess.
And it's a craft as well, isn't it? You learn from it, you get better at it. I feel like I'm on a very steep learning curve at the minute with writing a longer work of fantasy, a very steep learning curve. But I do feel with the second book, I'm not making the same mistakes as I was with the first book. Or I'm making different ones, but the same ones, you know. Yeah,
You mean like that quote in Jurassic Park? John Hammond, I'm not gonna make the same mistakes I did last time. No, you're not. You're gonna make new ones.
Exactly.
Exactly. You were asking if Bowie had joined us, and Bowie is here, so he's next to ask a question. And Bowie, obviously, you're the ones who you actually shared a story, and so I've sent it to both Anna and Emily before the call too, and I think you've had some feedback. But so yes, this is your moment.
I'm just wondering, how long did it actually take you to write the word swallower?
Oh, my story, The Word Swallower. Well, if when you get the slides, when you get the PowerPoint afterwards, you'll see the several different versions that I came up with of this story. I would say it probably took me about a week to write that story, and I tried different things, and I kept putting it away and coming back to it and putting it away. And sometimes you write a story, you think it's not quite there, you go off for a walk, or you go and play football, you go and do something else, you're watching TV, or you're in the shower, and you suddenly think, I've just realized what I need to do about that story, and you suddenly realize how you can improve it. So it was just a gradual process, and gradually over the course of several drafts I made it kind of what it became. But I have to say, I tend to work quite quickly. I'm somebody who gets bored quite quickly. I shouldn't really admit that. I get bored quite quickly. So one of the reasons I love short fiction, because I can kind of get it done, and then it's done, and I can move on to a new idea. So it's like really lovely. You can keep trying new ideas. So that's one of the lovely things about flash fiction. You can keep trying new things.
And just how many drafts did you actually do for the word swallower?
How many drafts? Well, on the slide, you'll see that I've put, I think, 3 main drafts. And it started off and I just called it the paper eater. And it was just a really short, I mean, do you want me to just I can very quickly show you. Let me see. I can just talk you through very quickly. So this is the first draft. I've put take 1, the paper eater, and it started with my daughter has taken to eating words. It started with pencils chewed down to the lead, their paint cracking beneath her bite, the wood yielding to her spit and suck. And that's all I wrote, just a couple of paragraphs. And I came back to it and I thought, there's something about that. I want to work on that. So then it was still called the paper eater, but I changed the perspective. Can you see it says she starts with the woody end of her pencil. So rather than my daughter, it's just about her. So it's not told from the mother's point of view anymore. And then there's a bit more detail in there. I've got a typo in there. I called it a penalty fare on the bus and it's misspelt. So that always irks me. So I kind of added a bit more. And then I reached the last one where I came upon exactly how I wanted to do it. Yeah, sorry, I realized it's kind of like those 2 slides have gone back to front. So this is the beginning of it. She starts with the woody end of her pencil. And then in the middle, it has, she is expanding. So those are the three stages of that story. So I'll just sort out the slides so that they're the right way around. But hopefully you can read the 3 versions and you can see how I went about trying to make it better in each version. And hopefully that will help you to see how I did it. Okay.
Woody, I have a question for you. Woody, it's Bowie. How many, like the story you shared, the yellow envelope? Is this the first draft or is it the second draft? What's your process?
That one was my second draft, and then I just kind of edited like the punctuation and some words that weren't as good as could be.
It's wonderful, Bowie. Thanks so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you. And I love that title. The title's great. The yellow envelope. So mysterious.
Yeah.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Nana, your turn for the question.
Why did you want to write the word swallower?
Are you asking me why did I want to write that story? Well, I wrote it for a competition. It was for an anthology called the National Flash Fiction Day Anthology, because believe it or not, there is such a thing as National Flash Fiction Day. It was last weekend, in fact, where everybody who writes flash fiction celebrates it. And in July, there's going to be the Flash Fiction Festival in Bristol. So it's an exciting community of writers. I wrote it because I really wanted to get a story in the anthology, and the topic was food. So I started writing that story, and it soon became clear it wasn't at all about food, and it wasn't right for that particular anthology. So I ended up sending it somewhere else. I sent it to a journal called Ellipsis. And I don't know, it kind of came from somewhere within, but what's interesting, I think of story writing as being a process of discovery. So sometimes you start a story with one idea. So that was somebody's eating some paper, and it becomes something else. And it becomes about how words change people and make them different, perhaps to their people in their own family, so that they're not even necessarily recognizable anymore because of the words they've absorbed through their reading. So it was a process of discovery. I wouldn't say I set out to write that story. It just kind of evolved into that. But that's a great question. Thank you.
Alba, you were next.
I have a question for Anna. Just have you ever imagined yourself? Because like as you've written, obviously, rhinos don't eat pancakes and dogs don't do ballet. Have you ever imagined yourself writing a book that's in the title, it says something something does do something something?
Good idea. Well, so the publishers are very keen on series, on having a series of books, because once you've got readers interested in one story, then they like to hook the next story onto what has already been a success. So Rhinos Don't Eat Pancakes, that was not the original title of the book. It was originally There's a Rhino in the Room, but it was my second book, and they were because Dogs Don't Do Ballet did quite well. They were very, very keen that the title of the second book sort of felt like a sequel or a follow-on to Dogs Don't Do Ballet. I've never liked that title personally, but it was chosen by the publisher to kind of make the link, and then they were quite keen on sort of continuing in that vein. But and I think I'm always willing to kind of to try, if the publisher kind of wants something. They've wanted a sequel to Biff for a long time, and I tried, but for some reason or another it hasn't really worked, and I've just my heart's been somewhere else, and I wanted to do something different, so you never know quite what's going to work out and what won't.
I think that's really interesting what you're saying, and I'm because when we think of writing, we think it's just one person. So it'd be quite interesting maybe to hear like who helps you with your books, like when you're talking about the publisher. And they made a really big decision. They decided the title of the book, which is like a crucial thing. So maybe you could tell us a bit about what sort of people you work with when you create books.
Yeah, well, so for picture books, obviously the main person is the illustrator, because that is very much a collaborative project. Excuse me, if it's a picture book. And the publisher likes to be in the middle of that relationship. So I sometimes correspond directly with the illustrator, but normally the editors will kind of manage that and sort of put things together. But it's everything that I've written has been a bit of a team effort, really. There's a lot of me sitting on my own, banging my head on the keyboard, but then I get a lot of help from editors and also other readers. I belong to a writing group. I share my stuff with other writers, friends, and sometimes it can be quite difficult to share something that you've written, and I think Bowie was so brave to share his story with us, and it was wonderful to see. But it does really help, as long as you're choosing the right people who are going to be helpful and supportive, but can also give you good critical feedback. All of my books have been a bit of a joint effort, if I'm perfectly honest. Yeah.
And you do editing as well, Emily.
I do, yeah, and I give feedback as well and do editing. But something that just made me think of is that it's possible to write collaborative stories as a group, and that's a really fun thing to do. So if any of you as a little group wanted to write together, you can write a story where somebody starts the story and then they tell the next person just the last line of the paragraph, and then that person then does the next paragraph without looking at the rest of the story. It's got a really funny name. It's called An Exquisite Corpse, which sounds a bit horrible. Sounds a bit like something made by Dr. Frankenstein, but it's quite a clever idea and it's quite a fun idea. So that's something you might like to have a go at, I think, some of you, if you wanted to kind of work together on a story.
Emily, what it is to do when we say editing? What does that mean?
Editing.
Yeah.
Okay, so the thing about flash fiction is because often the word count is so short, you do have to do a lot of editing. And I'm sure Anna's had to do this with her picture books as well, to fit a certain number of words on the page so that the illustrations can fit in and so on. So editing is when it's a bit like, if you can picture making something out of clay, and you start with your lump of clay. I think of the first draft, so the first go at a story is like the lump of clay, and then you want to shape it into something that's like you want it to look. So the editing is, I tend to read out my stories. So I read them to the cat, or I get my computer to read it to me. And then when you read it, you can often hear bits that aren't working. So like unintentional rhymes, or places where there's too many words, or maybe where it sounds a little bit clumsy. and you want it to sound a little bit like for it to flow a bit better. Or sometimes I spot where I've used the same word quite a lot and I want to make a change. So that's really handy. And I just go through and I try to make my sentences vary a bit, so they're not all starting with the same word. And I just get rid of stuff that feels like it's not needed in the story, because it's amazing how much stuff you can get rid of. And again, I love my metaphors here, so sorry for all these metaphors, but it's almost like, you know how you can draw a cartoon and just with a few lines you can show the suggestion of what something looks like. Well, I see flash fiction a bit like that, in that with just a few words you're given the suggestion of something much bigger. So you can really strip those words right down, and it's amazing what you can get rid of and still have a fantastic story.
And what is it like to work with someone? Sorry, I'm now asking all the questions. I'm very naughty. What's it like to have someone else edit your story? Or how does it feel like? Anna, can I ask you that question?
Well, I've been very lucky. I've always worked with really, really fantastic editors, and who've known how to kind of, you know, be supportive but tell me what needs doing. And so Goblin Wood has kind of just been through about 4 rounds of edits, starting with the big stuff, and then it kind of whittles down to line edits where they're looking at the sort of thing that Emily's been talking about, kind of, you know, the real texture of the language. And it's always been a good experience for me. I've been lucky. I think it could be a very painful experience if you don't have a good relationship with your editor, because, you know, it's hard to share your work, and you know, people have to, you know, be gentle sometimes, you know. But you also need to know what's working and what isn't. So it's a delicate relationship, but I've been very lucky with my editors.
Hi, Carmen.
Hey. So I want to know about the book Rhinos Don't Eat Pancakes.
Yeah.
So basically, first of all, The Worst Princess we got on a jumble sale.
Yeah.
And then one day my mum got Rhinos Don't Eat Pancakes, and I could tell like straight away that they were the same illustrations.
Oh yes, yeah. No, I've been really lucky with the illustrators I've worked with. So Sarah Ogilvy's done most of mine, and I think what I love about Sarah's illustrations is she's got a really wonderful balance of humour and heart.
Yeah, I want to be an illustrator when I'm older.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, Sarah's
A
very good.
children's book illustrator.
Sorry?
I want to be a children's book illustrator.
Well, wonderful. Well, Sarah's good, provides very good inspiration, I think, because she really has that balance, which I don't think many, which is a hard one to strike. She always kind of tugs at the heartstrings, but has a good dose of humour. And Adam Beer, who worked on Mammoth, is very similar in that respect. A lot of humour, a lot of heart, which is always good for children's books, I think.
Brilliant. Is that hand up because she's got another question? Go for it.
I have one for Emily. So when you started like doing competitions of writing books, did you ever get a bit like frustrated and a bit angry that you never like won? Because like it's obviously with an actor, if you don't get a role, you've been doing it for loads of years, you're just like, oh well, I didn't get the role. But when you started, did you ever get like a bit like
yeah, so I've always just been lucky that just at the point where I'm feeling a little bit like disheartened, I'll suddenly have a really good piece of news, and that will make me think, woo, that's great. So recently one of my stories was actually published in Argentina, and it was translated into Spanish, and that was just so exciting. And this was a story that I'd written a couple of years before and I'd sort of almost forgotten about. It's called Something Like Happy, and it's just about a day out at the seaside. And I was just so pleased to think of people in Argentina reading that story. So, you know, you can have bad days, of course, but I think the main thing that makes a writer is that they carry on. You know, if you keep at it, there'll be an idea that that someone will like, and that will win a competition or that will be accepted, and that's what you keep going for the positive stories. But thanks for that question. It's a really good one, because I think being a writer, it's not always a total walk in the park. It's not always the most fun thing. Not everybody can win all the competitions. So for every winner, there's going to be lots of disappointed people out there. But keep going. That's the big piece of advice I'd give.
I would say, Alba, I've noticed one thing is that you always come up with brilliant questions, and I think you're a natural interviewer. I could see.
Yeah, definitely.
No, go ahead.
What was the hardest book that you have written?
Thanks, Nana.
Good question. Well, the hardest for me is the one I'm writing at the minute, because it's a much bigger project than I've done before. And it's a trilogy. It's a story in 3 parts. And so it's one story, they're not standalone. And what that means is that the first part of the book is already set in stone and finished before I've written the end of it. And that I'm finding very difficult and quite scary, because often when you get to the end of a story and you have a massive plot hole, you think, oh, if I could just change that thing near the beginning, if I just put a compass in her knapsack in book 1, I would not have this massive problem in book 3. But I won't be able to do that because it's all going to be locked down. So that I am finding this trilogy a real challenge, but I also feel like I'm learning so much, and I'm really proud of what I've done so far. I feel the first book is complete. I'm sure there's lots that could be better about it, but it's very much the best that I can do at this point in my writing career, and I hope that the next ones will kind of grow or sort of build on it. But yeah, this is definitely the hardest thing I've ever done.
Brilliant. Emily?
Well, I would say the hardest thing I ever tried, and I haven't actually finished it, so that shows you how hard it was when I started writing. I started writing a historical novel, because I used to be a history teacher, so I thought, I've got to write about history. And I tell you what, I found it really hard, because I've been a history teacher. I kept going into history teacher mode and trying to teach people, and it just was not working, and I had to step away from that and try something else, because actually sometimes it's really good to just say, this isn't working. I really believe in persisting and trying again, but just occasionally you have to go, do you know what, this isn't working, I'm going to put that to one side, maybe save it for later, don't necessarily throw it away and get rid of it, put it to one side, try something else. And I'm glad I did, because I was just writing something, and I was kind of feeling like I was being a teacher rather than a storyteller.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Like sometimes your interests can collide in a way that is not helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bowie, you've got the last question, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
When did both of you actually start writing?
So I had my first book published when I was about 30, but I guess I started writing stories and bits and pieces. I think the first kind of book that I wrote was when I was around 6, and it was like on bits of paper stapled together, and it was about an evil slug who wanted to cover the world in slime, and I don't know why, but anyway, that was the first story that I wrote. And then I think I've always done bits and pieces since. I've dipped in and out. I haven't always done writing, sometimes I've done other stuff. But I've kind of dipped in and out of creative writing, I think, ever since I was quite little.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And when I was little, I remember me and my friend made a pact that we were going to be the youngest ever novelists. That didn't happen. But I remember writing books and illustrating them. I wasn't as good an illustrator as you, Carmen, I have to say. So that was something I could definitely put to one side. But I loved writing a diary. And for years, I wrote a diary. And I don't know if any of you do diary writing or journaling, that's a different kind of writing, but it's still writing. So there I was still writing away, even when I didn't realize I was writing. And then it was only really once I had my children that I started writing more. And I think it's just because I had a bit more time, because I was no longer working, I was at home more, and I had that time to just think. So that's when I started writing much more, which is about 12 years ago, something like that. So yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you. And it's as ever, you know, I have my paper with all my questions, and I know I did ask a few, but I didn't really have much time for that, because as ever we've got a wonderful participant here who really know their stuff. And every time you always have brilliant questions, and you show that you really understand this story. So I felt like I've learned so much today, and I've had so much fun. I hope you have too, and I really hope that we see more of your stories. Please share them with me. I would love to see more stories, and I might even share them with Anna and Emily.
I'd love to read your stories, so do send them.
Yes,
Bowie, thank you for sharing your story with us. That was brilliant.
Yes, thank you, Bowie.
We'd love to see them, and your illustrations as well, Carmen.
Yes, beautiful.
It's time to say goodbye, so thank you to everyone.
Bye everyone, thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.
Emily and Anna.
Emily.
Thank you. And lovely to meet you, Anna. I didn't know Anna before today.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hackney young voices.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye.
Goodbye.